Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the budget hearings. This afternoon session will be focused on Community Planning and Economic Development Department, and then we'll be moving right into the Regulatory Services Department. So as we begin today, of course, there's not a quorum required for this committee to start its business, but we will be seeing council members coming and going, and I'll be sure to recognize them as we do that. Right now, of course, we have Councilmember Yang. Thank you, Councilmember. And I'm John Quincy, the chair. And we'll begin as soon as you're ready. So if you're ready to go, Mr. Frank, you're welcome to begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Quincy, committee member, and others who will join us later. I am David Frank. I'm the interim director of CPED. And we are pleased to be here today to present our department's recommended 2018 budget. I should point out, we are joined by our leadership team. We have Heather Worthington, our new Director of Long Range Planning. We have Andrea Brennan, our Housing Director. We have Karuna Mahajan, our Operations Director. And we have some managers who I will be introducing by name a little bit later in the presentation. We have our Deputy Director, Chuck Lutz, who's back watching at Crown Roller Mill, and I think Steve Poore, our Development Services Director, will be joining us shortly. I know also that we are joined on the broadcast by many of our colleagues back at Crown Roller Mill, the Public Service Center, and at Aldrich, and I'd like to thank many of them for their work putting together the recommended budget, and to all of them for the great work they do each day for the residents and businesses of Minneapolis. We'd like to tell you today about the work CPED does, the recommended funding to support that work, but we'd like you to remember that it's all about the people we serve, the businesses we assist, and the people at CPED who do that work. This on your screen now is the quotation on the outside of the Public Service Building in Denver, Colorado, and it's one of the buildings we are studying as we design the new city office building. I saw this on my travels and I thought that's the theme of the budget presentation for this year. As you know, CPED is organized today into 4 business lines, and we will describe each of them as we present the budget for our 10 business budget programs, as well as several budget categories outside our operating divisions. Our recommended department 2018 budget is just under $110 million, including $8 million in enhancements, which I will describe, compared to an adopted 2017 budget of $103 million. And it's worth noting at this moment that we also generate $112 million of revenue. Our current department FTE count is 240, and we are recommending 2 additional FTEs, which I'll describe as we get into our programs. And now we're into our programs. We'll start with our Long Range Planning Division, as I mentioned, represented by our Director of Long Range Planning, Heather Worthington. So Program 1 for CPED of 10, Long Range Planning, is the one budget program for CPED's Long Range Planning Division, and Jack Byers is the manager of Long Range Planning. Long-range planning is comprised of different activities of planning, of urban design, of public art, of historic preservation, as well as research functions to support the department and the enterprise. The division builds new capacity in the areas of civic technology and community engagement, and the mission is to ensure that our strategic goals, the city's strategic goals and objectives, are codified in our adopted policies and plans. I'll be talking about this a lot today, the things that the different CPED divisions do and that the enterprise does. Many of them have their start in the research, the community engagement, and the work done by our long-range planning division. The long-range planning team organizes its work geographically into 5 planning sectors and also by core function. Let's see. The public art function, one of those, actively commissions public art each year through art in public places, and also includes the conservation, the maintenance, and consulting activities to support public art. Art in public places typically commissions 3 to 4 new public artworks annually to be integrated into city building projects, into infrastructure, transportation planning, and development. The research team, which I mentioned a moment ago, informs and contextualizes plans and policies through data stewardship, geographic profiles, trends tracking, mapping, policy recommendations, and pilot initiatives. As I said, this informs the work of the other divisions of CPED and the rest of the city enterprise. Oops, sorry, not quite there. The priorities for long-range planning for 2018 are completion of our comp plan update next year, to identify and track metrics that show progress on growth, equity, and sustainability resiliency goals, and continuing to strengthen our partnership with other city departments in order to deliver on strategic goals. Long-range planning's recommended 2018 budget is $3.7 million compared to $3.5 million in 2017, and we are recommending a continued staffing level of 15. We focus in long-range planning on economic development and revitalization in areas of economic disinvestment, sometimes called market failure, which underlies the work of the rest of our divisions of housing, of economic development, and also in our transit planning work. We utilize consistent data which allow us to more accurately leverage investments that improve our ability to respond to changing demographics and drive talent attraction and ensure equity, one of our city's most important goals. And by collecting and tracking that data and the metrics and the indices associated with resilience and sustainability, we can ensure that our planning efforts are fully integrated and optimal in these areas. And just as one example of the kind of thinking that starts in our long-range planning division and then spreads through the rest of CPED and then on to the rest of the enterprise, this chart is showing how much more transit investment can leverage job accessibility for residents of Minneapolis.
Excuse me, Mr. Frank, before you
Yes, Mr.
go
Chair.
into the next session, I just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge Councilmember Johnson, Councilmember Bender, and Vice President Glidden have joined us. And I just wanted to check in a little bit before you moved off of long-range planning. Obviously, a lot of conversation in the past year or two have been focused on the comp plan. And I just wondered if you wanted to take a moment during this budget presentation to talk about how that informs the 18 budget and how we're doing on 17.
Mr. Chair, thank you, and welcome, council members. The comp plan is going really well, is the very short answer to your question. We are on schedule. We are making all the forward progress that's reflected in our schedule, and our schedule says that starting this fall, we will be doing our next round of community engagement with the public that follows the community engagement that we were doing earlier this year. Let me just skip back and show you that photo. These photos are showing outreach done by our long-range planning section on the topic of the comp plan mostly. You can see there are some objects in the upper right called crankies. This is where the public has said, weighed in on here's what I'd like to see in Minneapolis, and it's then drawn by an artist, and you can, as the public comes by, they can see what other people have had to say about what is the public's vision for where Minneapolis should grow and how it should grow. So we have done community engagement till now, and there will be more this coming fall. Starting in the spring of 2018, the comp plan will be published, and the public and adjacent jurisdictions will have a chance to weigh in on it for the next 6 months before the council votes on it towards the end of 2018.
Okay. Thank you very much. I wonder if we could just kind of pause between programs.
Absolutely.
Just to make sure we have opportunity for any conversation.
That's great. Any other questions?
Not seeing any, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our next program, Program 2, is the first of several as part of our Housing Policy and Development Division, which is represented by Director Andrea Brennan. Program 2 is Affordable Housing Development. It's the first, as I said, of those 2 budget programs for our Housing Policy and Development Division, and Angie Skildum is the manager of Residential Finance. Residential Finance provides financial assistance for the development of affordable housing options for all Minneapolis residents. We promote the city's equity goals, furthering housing choices for all demographics, and the goal of growing the city by creating more affordable and market rate housing opportunities. We focus on the data and the state of the market, orienting our work to meet today's and tomorrow's challenges. And what that data and what that market analysis are telling us is that we should focus on making units affordable for a long time, shift our work towards preservation, and promote mixed income housing projects. Growth in our city is putting a lot of pressure on housing affordability and stability, with corresponding concerns about displacement. And so we are working with our partners in the Regulatory Services Department and the City Attorney's Office to develop a broader strategy for housing stability.
Council Vice President.
This is more a policy question, which I know we're not supposed to get into, but it is, kind of part of a resource question. So you mentioned as you were kind of talking about today, and I just got a little lost in the today versus tomorrow vision, but that part of our work is on market rate housing. And so because there is such a dramatic need for affordable or maintaining, even if you would create market rate, that sometimes there can be a market rate that's affordable to certain incomes and wanting to maintain that into the future. So I'm curious, you can tell me how we allocate resources based on this existing goal, I guess, of creating market rate housing, which I'll just say from my perspective, I think we should be dramatically scaling back whatever is part of that goal and focusing exclusively on affordability and maintaining affordability into the future.
Yep. Mr. Chair, Councilmember Glidden, what I meant to say and intended to say, I think I said, is that it is our goal to enhance the production, not necessarily with resources from the city, of all kinds of housing to serve all kinds of demographics. Right? We want housing available to everyone who lives in Minneapolis and everyone who will move here, be born here as the city grows. Our programs are targeted towards housing affordability and housing stability and housing preservation, as I'll describe in a moment. Unless Director Brennan tells me I have it wrong, we don't have financial programs that support the development of market rate housing. Did I say that right? I said that right. Does that answer your question?
That's helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Councilmember Bender, before we begin. I'm sorry. Councilmember Bender?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to decide if I'm jumping ahead. Maybe I'll let you finish and figure out if I'm jumping ahead and then
Okay.
ask my question.
Sounds good. Mr. Chair, Residential Finance's recommended 2018 budget is $15 million compared to $14.3 million last year or this year, and we are recommending a continued staffing level of 11. This is the first of our change items. The recommended enhancement for the Family Housing Initiative is $1 million of general fund one time. This would follow the $1 million appropriation in the 2017 budget. This program was created in 2016 to assist with the development of affordable housing for larger families with extremely low incomes, below 30% of median, that are either experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. The need for large, extremely affordable family units continues to be critical. And just for instance, the 3-bedroom rental housing vacancy rate for affordable units is less than 0.5%. There's a second recommended enhancement for residential finance, and that is the housing preservation strategy. This is large one, both in dollars and sub-items, so I'll dwell on this for a little bit. This is $3 million of general fund and $650,000 of non-general fund one time. The 2017 budget includes $1.5 million for a new program called for Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing, or NOAA, the NOAA Preservation Fund. And this budget proposal is to expand the city's housing preservation strategy. The 2017 launch with $1.5 million for the NOAA Preservation Fund was a great first step, but the range of problems faced by Minneapolis tenants requires a broader and multi-pronged strategy. The sale of rental property and the associated rent increases continue to occur at an alarming rate. Tenant livability and habitability issues are also a growing concern. The 2018 Housing Preservation Strategy here, this is a request of $3.65 million, and its expected outcomes are 400 Minneapolis renter households receiving direct housing support and 3,000 renter households with information and referrals. So I'll now describe what makes up $3.65 million. It's $1.5 million for the NOAA Preservation Fund to assist nonprofit buyers to acquire market affordable properties in good condition. This would be 60 to 100 units of naturally occurring affordable housing, which would be preserved. $1.9 million for a new pilot, the Minneapolis Small and Medium Multifamily Land Banking Pilot, to address properties in need of immediate repairs. The expected outcome here would be 100 units of NOAA acquired, stabilized, and habitability issues addressed. $650,000 one-time set aside in a reserve fund of $9.2 million, which is a second mortgage loan fund, to finance the acquisition of properties in need of immediate repairs or long-term preservation strategy. $1.25 million for a revolving acquisition and emergency repair fund. $100,000 to continue and expand support of a tenant hotline, providing information and referrals on tenant rights and responsibilities. This is, I should say as an aside, as part of our partnership with Regulatory Services. This item is currently funded this year in the Reg Services budget. And the outcome from this will be 3,000 Minneapolis residents served with information and referrals. And lastly, $150,000 to support expanded nonprofit third-party legal services to represent low-income Minneapolis residents in their efforts to have landlords maintain rental property in compliance with housing code and covenants of habitability. Outcome, 225 Minneapolis tenant households in repair cases in Hennepin County District Court. And I'm guessing there'll be some questions on this one. If I could just say, we are proposing $250,000, those last two that I mentioned, $100,000 to continue and expand support of a tenant hotline, and $150,000 for third-party legal services, $250,000 in expanded services for tenants to send a strong message to landlords that the city supports tenants' rights. We would issue an RFP for third-party services, and as I said, we are doing this in a strong partnership with Regulatory Services and the City Attorney's Office. I'll pause there, Mr. Chair. I'm expecting there may be some questions on this one.
I think so. Council Vice President, is this one you'd like to talk on?
Yep.
Sure.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm kind of understanding, because there's like some shifting going on, and I'm trying to understand what is new, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's not shifting. So what again is the 100,000? So, and I feel a little confused. So today my understanding is we have the city, and I'm not sure which department controls which, but today there is a contract with legal aid. I thought that was in the range of $25,000, something along those lines, which has been a longstanding contract, maybe for varying amounts, that we have had with legal aid for representation. And then there is a second contract that the city has with Homeline for kind of a little broader services than just direct legal representation in eviction cases. And then in the past, there was a hotline that was manned by staffed by City of Minneapolis employees there was a tenant services referral hotline that did exist for many years and then was discontinued somewhere in the 5-year range. I don't know exactly when it was discontinued. So I'm just trying to understand sort of what's the expansion today, what would be the services the city provides versus what are things that you think go beyond our existing contracts with legal aid and Homeline today.
Fair enough. Do you have that history? Yes. Great. This is Andrea Brennan, our housing director. She'd be happy.
Ms. Brennan, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, Council Vice President Glidden, council members. So the $100,000 proposed for the tenant hotline, that is something that is in our current budget, as Mr. Frank mentioned, in the 2017 budget out of the regulatory services budget. So that would be a continuation of contracting with, right now it's Homeline,
Yep.
to provide those tenant information referral services.
Okay.
You're correct. In the past, we had some of that work was staffed in-house, and that no longer is the case. We've gone to this contract arrangement instead. There are 2 other contracts that the city has with legal aid. I believe one of them is from the IGR Special Grants Program, where they do some testing for discrimination that may be occurring in the housing market. So that is part of some of the fair housing work that is happening. And then there's another grant, I believe, a contract with legal aid that I believe is through the health department. So that's some ongoing work that's happening. But here,
So there should be another contract with legal aid that is specific to eviction defense.
this is specifically, the expansion is something that is specific to, yes, evictions as well as representing tenants when there are needed repairs. So the expansion is the $150,000 proposed for additional legal services above and beyond anything that the city is currently doing.
Okay. So there still is some contract that is held by the health department?
And yes, and I can't speak directly to that, but it's not related to evictions or repair issues.
Okay. I guess where I'm just feeling a little confused is I know there's been an existing contract that hasn't gone away with legal aid for a relatively small amount for eviction defense. And I'm feeling a little lost on where that's at or who holds that. So it sounds like
We
you're
can
unaware
follow up
there's
with Well, we can
eviction
follow up with
defense.
that.
Okay. All right. So the new is the 150, which would be RFP'd for kind of the best service provider response. Okay.
Correct. Thank you.
Great.
Councilmember Reich has joined us and has a question as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in the top dash, it explicitly calls out the involvement of the nonprofit builders. In the second dash, is that it's not called out, but is that implied that they would be the recipients of the 1.9 million for the for that category of housing, and thereby the ability to make agreements for long-term affordability, permanent and codified in some kind of document?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Reich, your question is if the $1.9 million would be targeted to our nonprofit partners as well, and yes, that's how it would work.
And in both cases, the 1.519, we'd have instruments that would preserve like our multifamily, you get the money, we get the long-term affordability kind of arrangement.
Yes. Well, come on up.
Mr. Chair, council members, Councilmember Reich. The NOAA strategy, preservation strategy, is different from our typical strategy in the sense that the long-term affordability, meaning 30 years or longer, is very challenging to achieve. And so typically, the reason why we're targeting our work with nonprofits in this area is to work with nonprofit mission-driven partners that are going to be motivated through their nonprofit mission orientation to want to work with us in the long term to preserve affordability. But the actual financial tools that we're proposing are tools that are necessary in order to even have a seat at the table and have an opportunity to preserve this housing. So the goal is for continued perpetual affordability with this, but there will not actually be like 30-year restrictions on these properties. No one has figured out how to do that, but we believe that these interventions will ultimately position these properties for the long term for affordable and responsible operation.
So perhaps continued problem solving to maybe achieve a more permanent instrument. Again, there are partners, they would be motivated to do that as well. Because even well-meaning actors with a great track record might have pressures on their overall portfolio, make a case for broader affordability on the backs of certain units that have more market viability in their portfolio. Not an unheard of scenario, actually.
Mr. Frank, I think one of the things that that I'm trying to look at is a lot of the funding that we're talking about is with contracted partners, which we have total reliance and support with. I'm wondering how we're going to be able to administer this in-house. Do we need any additional staff in this area, or how is that going to be addressed?
Mr. Chair, that's a great question. So the city staff believes that there should be an additional city staff resource available to stay on top of the quickly changing and very important tenant work that we're starting to outline here, something that we're calling a housing stability coordinator. You may hear about that as part of the city coordinator's budget. We think, since I'm standing here, we think the right place for it is with CPED, with the kind of policy work that we're doing. It is not currently in the budget proposal that the recommended budget that we're talking about today.
Okay, thank you. Council Member Bender, and then Council Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was my question. So I understood that there was interest in CPED in moving the position proposed in the coordinator's office to housing. So, and this is something that I had interest in and asked the mayor to consider putting in the budget, partly because when I was working with staff along with a number of colleagues and preparing for our housing study session and then the subsequent staff direction that came out with a lot of input from staff, it seemed that we needed more staff support to be able to achieve all of the things that we included in that staff direction and all of the interest in housing policy that council members have. I'm interested, so, and that staff direction covers a lot of different ground. It covers things about investment in housing and affordable housing, things that the housing department does, but it also includes things that are more in long-range planning or development services. It includes things that hit regulatory services, and it includes what's actually new work, essentially, which would be looking at renter protections, which doesn't seem to fall neatly into any existing department, which seems to be kind of happening collaboratively. So I'm interested in just kind of hearing why putting it in this particular division makes more sense rather than having that sort of citywide approach that the coordinator's office had. And to be clear, it's nothing, I mean, it's just a question about how we could most arrange the work to reach the goals. I think the housing division is doing a great job.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, we do too. Thank you. Thank you. The work that you're hearing about today, and I'm trying to give credit where credit is due to our partner departments, specifically regulatory services and the city attorney's office, and I'm probably remiss in not already mentioning the coordinator's office, right? I would say a lot of the coordination function is coming from my colleague who's stepped forward a couple times already, and we think that, as the name suggests, this is our housing division, that's the right place from which to coordinate it, no pun intended. We're the ones who have been tracking what are the outcomes, what are the directions from the staff direction that followed the study session, and we think that the right place to keep this work together and not keep it in another place to coordinate helps make that effort easier.
And just to follow up, so then do you imagine the staff person being able to effectively work on things like renter protection policy if the council is still interested in pursuing that, and sort of those things that don't currently fall within the real kind of day-to-day work of the housing division?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, yes. And Since you said it like that, which if the council is still interested or something, right? I think that it will be a strong interest of this council for the rest of the year and the next council for the next years. It is also possible that there's something else that becomes more important. And to me, that's one more reason not to have it be a single purpose position named as Housing Stability Coordinator that only does that. I mean, that's the thing right now, but it could be that 3 years from now, there's a policy need for something else. An additional argument point, if you will, for why the CPET Housing Division is the right place, we think.
Thank you.
Councilman, did you?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
So, yeah, and I had my thing up for a little bit because I had a question that's more about kind of numbers of units, but I'm actually wanted to weigh in on this thing too, the question about the staff person. And what did you call the title again?
I believe the working name is the Housing Stability Coordinator.
Housing Stability Coordinator. I think a little bit of the issue is really just how do departments, and honestly, the Housing Division isn't the only one, regulatory services is also, I think, just as a department trying to figure out how it better balances its work between a long time focus on the property owners and connection with the property owners versus now having more connection to the people who live in the properties, the tenants, and balancing out their work. And I think there's some of the same questions here about how will the housing division be able to make sure there's kind of a good balance, that there isn't somehow some implicit conflict of interest is the wrong word, but just because the work for so long has been in a different space, how do you kind of balance out those interests? So, and I'll just use an example. There was some work that was done by the innovation team. Some of that on the eviction study that was mentioned in the housing study session, but I think that study was done some time ago and it kind of fell in the cracks, and not sure kind of what was the better avenue for continuing to lift up that work and having attention on it. So I want to just put that out there, because actually I think the answer can come from Housing Division, and I'm really open to this position being there. I actually have some concern about the city coordinator being the home for that position, in part because I think they're getting some span of control issues. And I would want to know that whoever that is getting the right amount of time spent on this really important body of work and the right kind of supervision to be able to have that work uplifted, because I think it will take a lot of energy, a lot of support, a lot of working with the city attorneys and other folks. So I wanted to kind of put that out there. So, and I think you've kind of answered, but I just wanted you to hear a little bit more of what I think kind of some of the debate is.
Okay, thank you.
And then I had a numbers question. So on this housing preservation strategy, and then on the other strategies too, I really like it that you have the amount of units that you anticipate being created. And I can't remember if this was specified in the housing study session, but it's kind of, I feel like we should have these numbers more in front of us, is what's kind of the estimate of the need, and so that we are seeing that in context with what we are addressing. And I think, again, it kind of puts in more focus. This is very concrete. I appreciate that these are numbers, and I will say there is no place around the state of Minnesota that is putting up the kind of numbers that we are, with the hard work of our staff kind of figuring out how to make this work. But there is a bigger context of the need. And so I'd appreciate being able to understand that too.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Councilmember Glidden, we have a results slide coming up in a few more slides that says what our production target is. But I think your question is much more broad than that, right? Do we happen to have that handy or off the top of our head, or should we come back? Okay. Yeah, if that's okay, we'll.
It's a bigger thing, and I think too, there's probably different ways to say what that need is depending on what income levels that you're talking about. So I just want to say I'd appreciate that information.
Sure thing.
Mr. Frank, I agree completely. The Council Vice President has just outlined when it's in the coordinator's office, it kind of has a big policy kind of direction, but I think it's really important to operationalize that, and that's best done, in my view, within CPED. So I'm looking forward to some kind of relationship where we can make that amendment in staffing, because it needs to operationalize what we've been setting out as a policy. And I'm really excited to see that there's so much tenant-focused work being done in this budget proposal, and see what we can continue to work on. But I did want to mention Mr. Intermal has a comment, probably perhaps more to the numbers issue of the budget itself.
Mr. Chair and members, actually it's to the issue of where the housing policy coordinator sits. It is the mayor's intention in her technical amendment offered during markup to move the position to CPED. It would have been there when the budget was released, but I think that the discussion we've heard today highlights some of the question as to where it would sit, and a decision was made, unfortunately, a little bit late in the process in terms of assembling the budget itself, but that is her intent.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, that was a great conversation. Thank you. So, just to summarize for everyone who likes to keep an eye on how much is in the trust fund and how much in the housing preservation strategy. So, in 2017, the combined Affordable Housing Trust Fund and Housing Preservation Strategy was $9.6 million, and the 2018 recommended is 10.15. So 9.6 2017, 10.15 2018, and to break that down for next year, that's $6.5 million for trust fund and $3.65 million for the Housing Preservation Strategy. That's how that all rolls up. And Councilmember Glidden, as I had said we would get to, here it is, and I know this is not your question, but we are producing and preserving a lot of affordable housing. Results from year to year vary, of course, because of the development cycle. And what this chart is showing you is that we are close to meeting our production target, which is set by Met Council each year on average. It's worth noting that in the comp plan update, the production targets will be updated for the years beyond. I'm pausing as we're between residential finance and the next program.
I think we're good to go.
Okay. Program 3, which is Homeownership Support and Development, is the second of the two budget programs for CPED's Housing Policy and Development Team. Elfric Port is the manager of Residential and Real Estate Development, or REDS. REDS assists with the development and support of ownership housing and the elimination of blight conditions in 1 to 4 unit dwellings, and returns city-owned vacant parcels to strategic productive use. The overall strategy is critical to return the housing market, to get the housing market to a more healthy condition. RED's recommended 2018 budget is $9 million compared to 6.6 in 2017, and we are recommending a continued staffing level of 18. Several enhancements, several change items for REDS. The recommended enhancement for the Minneapolis Homes program is $250,000 of general fund and $500,000 of non-general fund one time. This is part of the council-approved infill development strategy, which supports the development of more than 400 city-owned vacant lots, which are suitable for 1 to 4 unit development. This strategy has 3 main components: development assistance, long-term affordability financing, and home buyer incentives. The 2017 budget includes $1 million for this strategy, of which $750,000 was ongoing and $250,000 was one time. I'm happy to tell you that staff successfully leveraged another $850,000 from state and county funds for a total budget of $1,850,000 in 2017. We think this will result in 20 to 30 new homes, at least 10 of which will be long-term affordable for at least the next 30 years. These city vacant lots are a great opportunity to continue to grow the tax base and our population and expand homeownership opportunities, with a particular focus on reducing the racial disparity gap in homeownership rates between white people and people of color. Given the extremely low inventory of affordable homes for sale in the city and the high number of city-owned vacant lots, we are recommending these additional funds in 2018, and we expect 30 new homes, approximately 15 of which will be long-term affordable.
Thank you.
A second recommended change item is the Homeownership Opportunity Minneapolis Lease to Purchase Program. This is $500,000 of non-general fund one time. As I just mentioned, the city's racial disparity in home ownership rates between whites and households of color is 35%. That's one of the highest rates in the nation. Home ownership helps to create generational wealth within families, provides long-term benefits, and to reduce this home ownership gap, the city launched a home ownership assistance program in 2015, or our HOME program. It provides down payment assistance to low and moderate income home buyers, and in 2016, the program was expanded to provide grants to nonprofit organizations that provide home ownership capacity building. First quarter 2017 results show that 116 households were served by these organizations, 77% of which are households of color. This proposal would expand homeownership capacity through a lease to purchase program in the amount of $500,000 for affordability and development gap assistance, and it supports households to transition successfully into ownership by overcoming credit barriers that have historically impacted people of color in attaining homeownership. Program participants will work with a qualified nonprofit organization to assist in the successful transition from lease to purchase. Questions on that one?
I would like to add just a quick comment. First of all, as we talked about the infill housing program, which is continuation in many ways of the Green Homes North program.
Yep.
These were pretty innovative. I mean, not only have we created new housing opportunities, we've worked with amazing developers who have really worked hard to bring those online. As a member of the committee, I know Councilmember Reich has been watching this as well. Councilmember Yang, this was a big portion of the work that you've been doing up on the north side. It also saved some resources from the city because these were vacant lots for a number of years in many cases, and really reduced our maintenance cost of those operations, and as well as improving neighborhoods. So it's really a goal-oriented. It was really great. I'm seeing we're over 25% of the initial goal that we've set out, and had it not been for that direction, and not been for that policy, and not been for those resources, we would be sitting on a lot more homes and vacant homes, boarded homes, or raised homes that are just sitting undeveloped. So I'm very excited about the project and its progress it's made in the past 2 years, and really looking forward to how this will impact in 2018 as we continue that work. Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Frank, you talked about I guess the budget for 2017 and, what moving forward to 2018. And, I mean, as I recall, with regards to, let's say, the developer assistance piece, I mean, that piece is probably the most popular piece. I mean, we probably maxed out on every single dime that we allocated there. But the two other components, I mean, not very used. And so my first question is, do those amounts carry forward to 2018?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, I'll glance towards my team. Are we able to? Yes, we're able to carry those forward.
Okay. And if they do carry forward, I mean, the next question is, I mean, how are we going to market those so that those become much more popular for folks? Just because, there was a story in North News recently about, the $20,000 that we give as an incentive with no income restrictions. And so far, I believe we only have one applicant that, has moved through the process. Maybe we might have another one. Okay, great. Two, but, I mean, we allocated for probably about 12, in a year, basically. And so if it's just 2 out of 12, I mean, that means that we have some funds sitting. And I guess my question is, I mean, how are we going to move forward in terms of, getting more people to be interested? And that's not only just with regards to the individual no income restrictions, but I mean, that's also with regards to the long-term affordability piece, because I believe that piece as well, we allocated, I think, $250,000 to that. And at the end, I think we might have had maybe 2 units.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, both of these initiatives, as you pointed out, are brand new. And I don't think that the fact that we haven't committed those funds means that they aren't important programs, or they're not in demand, or they won't be very useful in achieving our goals. On the long-term affordable side, right now we have one nonprofit who technically meets the definition of a group that provides that long-term affordability. That's the Community Land Trust. We are working on developing new models that we could employ through deed restrictions that are ongoing, so that other nonprofits can take advantage of that long-term affordable assistance. So we believe that we will have that up and running in 2018, and that we will easily use the funds that have been budgeted for 2017, as well as any funds that will be budgeted for 2018. On the home buyer initiated model, we actually have 3 home buyers who are currently in the system. And again, that's something that's brand new. And we, when we proposed that program, we didn't know whether that was exactly the right amount of money. So we're going to evaluate as we go along. This is also something that is a little bit of a steep learning curve for a lot of potential home buyers, of how to go about actually buying a lot and building a home. So we're just trying to be patient and work with potential and interested home buyers. And I think we'll have a lot more to report in another 6 months or so about whether that program should continue or whether we should make adjustments to it.
Okay, great. And Mr. Chairman, I'm hopeful that not only can we get more folks to be a part of the programs, but also that we will get first responders and teachers to be a part of it as well, because the incentive is there for them as well.
I agree, first of all. I want to just go back to the lease to purchase program.
Yep.
Is that a new program? Is that what we would often consider a pilot, or is this something we're ready to expand what was happening before? Or is it a new innovative approach?
Mr. Chair, we've had equivalent programs for some time. I would say this is a new emphasis, is probably the right way to say it.
Thank you.
May I continue?
Please.
Okay. The last of the change items for this program is a recommended enhancement to homeowner improvement and lending, and this is 2 additional FTEs. So I mentioned this in my introduction. These are the 2 FTEs we are recommending, and as you can read here, we have been contracting with the only respondent to the RFP that we put out for this service to work with homeowners on rehab, and that provider sort of said, we need to raise our rates, and sort of, we don't want to be in this business. And so we did the analysis and believe, compared to what we would be paying, it is much more efficient to provide these services with city staff with a predictable cost and to provide a predictable outcome than to contract with a single provider who's not exactly on board with providing that service anymore. So we think it would be either budget neutral or a cost savings to have these additional FTE.
So in the 18 budget, in the recommendation, is it to reallocate that contracted amount with Gimmick? I assume that's Gimmick.
Correct.
To the in-house ongoing staff commitment.
I would have to turn to my finance colleagues who are nodding yes. So, Mr. Chair, the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And here's some results to show you. In the past 2 years, 194 properties were impacted in a good way through Minneapolis homeownership development programs, while we still have 699 total, but 524 single family in our inventory, 524, representing a significant opportunity to create more housing. So this is showing you that we have done good work and we have much more to do. And one great example of adjusting how we do our work, we get asked about this a lot, to achieve more impactful results is when we revised our Homeownership Opportunity Minneapolis program in 2016 to tie eligibility for homebuyer assistance to participants in homeownership capacity programs. And we quickly saw a large jump in African American homebuyers assisted by the program. I think this slide shows 13% as soon as we made that change, which is great. So I'm between programs, pausing.
Thank
Great, thank you. We are on to Economic Policy and Development, represented by Director David Frank. Program 4 is business development. This is the first of 4 budget programs for CPED's Economic Policy and Development Division. Miles Mercer is the manager of business development. Business development works with businesses to start, stay, and grow in Minneapolis with the objectives of equitable job growth, tax-based growth, and community vitality. The toolbox includes business loans, business facade grants through our Great Streets program, business district marketing assistance, also through Great Streets, business consulting and technical assistance through our great VTAP program, site search assistance, support to community organizations for business recruitment, and commercial real estate development. Business Development's recommended 2018 budget is $10.1 million compared to $10.2 million in 2017, and we are recommending a continued staffing level of 19. We have 2 change items to report to you in business development in this program. One is for a commercial land trust pilot. So, I'm sorry, this is $50,000 of non-general fund one time. Out in the community, we have heard, and I think many of you have heard, that we're doing so much to address residential affordability, but commercial districts, commercial corridors, tenants, businesses are experiencing the same upward pressure on rents as residents are. And what is it that we're doing to address commercial gentrification, commercial displacement? This is a pilot of $50,000, as I say, one time, to try to get our arms around how a commercial land trust program could work. And we're excited to get going. Outcomes would align well with our city goals, including growing the city equitably. And we would be figuring out what are the economics required to make this happen. The second change item in this program is for ongoing property management at Lake and Nicollet. Now that we own the property, there's the need to pay for what it takes to maintain it, to sweep the parking lot, to keep the light bulbs on and changed, to plow snow sometime soon. We manage an existing food truck lease, and there may be potential lease needs. So we have existing funds in the department to cover the second half of 2017, but this change item requests additional funds for 2018 property management. So, Mr. Chair, our results in business development show that we provided financing to 29 small businesses. This is in 2016, 29 small businesses, including 38% to businesses owned by people of color and 42% to businesses owned by women. We supported the growth and retention of 450 jobs. We served 413 entrepreneurs through BTAP. And the providers, as you can see on this chart, serve a very diverse client base. And we helped through BTAP to create and retain over 1,900 jobs, trained 24 participants in our Cooperative Technical Assistance Program, or CTAP, and 36 emerging real estate developers through our Developer Technical Assistance, or DTAP. Great Streets results showed that our investments were leveraged by private funds by 3 to 1. And we're also, as I think you know, actively engaged in key redevelopment projects around the city. Program 5, or business licensing. This is the second of 4 budget programs for economic policy and development. Grant Wilson is the manager of business licenses and consumer services. Business licensing manages business licensing for liquor establishments and over 200 other types of businesses. We annually license 12,000 businesses and individuals around the city, as well as hundreds of special events each year. We also do a great job through business licensing with Business Made Simple, always trying to come up with changes to the code to allow new and emerging business types and to simplify our code for businesses whenever possible. We've done amendments to allow additional types of mobile vending, breweries, distilleries, sidewalk sales, and other entertainment options in our restaurants. These are just a few examples of how we're growing in Minneapolis.
Mr. Frank, you mentioned the 12,000 small businesses that we're licensing. I'm hesitant to put you on the spot, but I wondered if you could break those down. What kind of businesses are we talking about?
Mr. Chair, I would be tempted to make this a quiz because I would have failed. But of those 12,000 businesses, the top 3 are 2,300 taxi licenses, 530 restaurant licenses, and I would definitely not have gotten this last one, 430 plumbing licenses. That's the 3rd most popular licensing type.
Very interesting. Thank you. Just an aside, I was just kind of
Just an
curious,
aside.
but
Just an aside.
you're ready.
The services provided by licensing include assisting business owners through various regulatory processes, their license application review, background checks, on-site facility inspections, and the collection of fees with an annual renewal billing system. We also manage the city's false burglar alarm program to bring down the number of false police call responses through education and penalties. The recommended 2018 budget for business licensing is $4.7 million compared to $4.3 in 2017, and we are recommending a continued staffing level of 30. As you can see here, our 2016 results show that applications for alcohol licenses for on-sale liquor and on-sale wine continue to increase since we have been doing all we can to make it simpler, easier, faster to get a license to open this kind of an establishment and make our city more vital and have more things for our growing number of residents to do. I'll continue on. Program 6 is Adult Workforce Development. This is the 3rd of 4 budget programs for economic policy and development, and the first of 2 programs which are managed by Deb Barhelgen and her team in employment and training. So this is adult, and then we'll do youth in a minute. Adult Workforce helps Minneapolis residents gain employment through multiple programs. Minneapolis Works, Minneapolis Sector Training. We serve low-income Minneapolis job seekers, and the Dislocated Worker Program for people who have lost their jobs and helping them to return to the workforce. We partner with 15 community-based agencies, and we provide career counseling, job readiness, job search assistance, and job placement assistance. And we help people who have multiple barriers to employment get trained and find jobs. In response to the rapid growth in tech jobs in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region, we, along with 3 high-quality accelerated learning programs, Prime Digital Academy, Creating IT Futures, or IT Ready, and the Software Guild, came together with 60 regional employers for the purpose of training and placing diverse workers in tech careers. This initiative is growing. We have 369 employers engaged to date, offering internships and employment opportunities for tech hire students and graduates. This is a real success story, and we are noted for it around the country. Recommended 2018 budget for adult workforce is $6.4 million compared to $5.7 million in 2017, and we are recommending a continued staffing level of 7. Several change items here. The first is continued support for the Cedar Riverside Opportunity Center. This is $50,000 of general fund one time. As I think you know, the Cedar Riverside Opportunity Center opened in March of this year as a one-stop destination with pathways to employment for Cedar Riverside residents. Special focus on the needs of East African youth and young adults. As I know you know, the city supported the Opportunity Center with an FTE dedicated to programming with $75,000 in one-time support this year, and we are recommending another $50,000 this year, or next year, excuse me, for operational support. The demand is very high at the Opportunity Center, and other partners who have already put money on the table have asked if we will as well to address the continuing demand at the center. Second enhancement for adult workforce development is Minneapolis Career Pathways. This is $75,000 of general fund one time. Like all employers, we want to do and need to do what we can to face labor shortages. It is crucial that we continue to attract and retain top talent, and we've had great success with this program, where together with other departments, we help them set up pathways into their employment so that Minneapolis residents can find jobs within the city enterprise. So we would put out an RFP to other city departments, So far this year, we're working with Convention Center, Human Resources, Reg Services, Police, and Public Works. And we would administer this together with those other departments. Our 2016 results show that we assisted over 1,500 Minneapolis residents through employment training, job counseling, and career navigation. 850 gained employment, and most of the remaining participants continue to use employment services provided by our programs to secure permanent or temporary employment. The average cost per participant in these adult programs is $4,000, including tuition assistance for nearly 40% of all the participants. 70% of program participants are people of color. All are unemployed, underemployed, or low income. And we focus our work where it matters, serving residents in North, Cedar, Riverside, and South Minneapolis in neighborhoods with high poverty rates. Good. Program 7 is Youth Training and Development. This is the fourth of our budget programs in Economic Policy and Development, and the second of 2 programs managed by Deb Barhelgen in Employment and Training. Youth Training and Development creates a strong future workforce by reducing youth unemployment and racial employment disparities. Minneapolis youth ages 14 to 24 are comprised into the Step Up program and Minneapolis Youth Works. Both programs are designed to give Minneapolis youth, specifically those from communities of color, low-income families, and youth with barriers to employment, the tools to find their place within the workforce. Step Up, the most recognized Minneapolis youth program, serves close to 2,000 Minneapolis youth every summer, connecting them to real and valuable work experiences. They get work readiness training, they learn good work habits, earn wages, and gain experience, and it's worth saying, provide great support to local businesses. We get great leverage from the private sector on this one, and as a several-year mentor for a Step Up intern, this is an awesome program. The recommended 2018 budget for youth training and development is $4.8 million compared to $4.7 million in 2017, and we are recommending a continued staffing level of 7. And our 2016 results show that we leveraged $1.3 million of private sector wages for Step Up. That's everyone's favorite ongoing program, and we are adding new programs to address the needs that we find each year. Program 8 is the first one in Development Services, represented by Director Steve Poore. The first is Land Use Design and Preservation and Zoning Administration Enforcement. It's the first of 3 within this division. Jason Wittenberg is the manager of Land Use Design and Preservation, and Brad Ellis is the manager of Zoning Administration Enforcement. Land Use Design and Preservation and Zoning Administration Enforcement guides development as required by law. We help residents and property owners invest in the city in a way that aligns with the comp plan and development regulations. We manage, we review, we enforce, and we also staff the City Planning Commission, Heritage Preservation Commission, Zoning Board of Adjustment, and we guide ongoing regulatory reform affecting land use and development. Just a few things we are working on now include new regulations for downtown parking ramps and changes to how we regulate building materials to encourage best practices in design while acknowledging that increased costs challenge our ability to produce affordable housing. Land Use Design Preservation and Zoning Administration Enforcement's recommended 2018 budget is $4 million compared to $3.7 in 2017, and we are recommending a continued staffing level of 24. Just a few results from what that team has been doing this year and in 2016. We reviewed 148 1-to-4 unit dwellings, which is a larger number of single-family homes. We proposed 13 zoning code text amendments, just a couple, allowing duplexes on standard-sized lots in duplex districts, skyway standards together with our downtown stakeholders, and revised setbacks in commercial districts for continuous street frontage. We approved 66 conditional use permits, which is a smaller number because we have simplified the code, and we reviewed 20 major projects which developers happily continue to pursue.
Council Vice President Glidden had a question back. Yep. Whenever you're ready.
Thanks. Mr. Chair. I just wanted to bring up something that Mr. Frank and I had more of a personal conversation about, which is, and I haven't had a chance to talk to Mr. Poor about this, but just being able to take another look at how do we think about what are the priorities within the Historic Preservation Division. And, I think it's, again, kind of dovetails with a lot of questions about work throughout the city. But, one thing that has been coming up a little bit more and more recently, as we've had a few more than normal historic designations that are based more on connection to social events and history, or significant people, excuse me, as opposed to the architectural significance of the property, is just kind of what's our balance on those kinds of that kind of work between the designations based on architectural significance of a property versus how are we using our staff to do some of this work around mapping the importance of our social history, including our history of race and racism. And so I think we've been doing more of those than we have maybe in many, many other years. But it kind of begs the question of, how should we balance out that work? I know there's a lot of pressure on the time of staff, and so this does end up being an important question just about how do they get to prioritize? Is it just who files nominations versus how does staff identify what projects kind of more proactively they go out and do? I know sometimes that's based on being able to marry their work with grants and other things that can just kind of enhance the capacity. So I wanted to bring that up, especially because we have had a focus on equity and these kinds of issues as one of our city goals recently. And I think trying to think how does that translate down into the work of divisions and departments is important. And this is one of those that just has a special opportunity in this division to help us with some of these questions. And again, I really appreciate there's been more work on this area than in many, many years before. But I do think it's an area to kind of look a little bit more carefully at kind of how can we use our capacity within the city to better tell some of this really important history of our city.
Mr. Poor.
Chairman Quincy, Councilmember Glidden, thank you for the opportunity to speak about that work. First, I just want a little small correction is the work of preservation is actually, since some of the reorganization of CPED is actually split between long-range planning and development services.
Okay.
And there's a useful conversation to hear.
And I might not even realize all that, so I apologize.
Well, no, that's okay. Some of that work is guided by conversation with the Heritage Preservation Commission in terms of what we choose to work on, where some priorities may be. The other piece is that while properties age, they have a greater opportunity to become historic, right? But we've also run through a lot of inventory about what is historic. We have potential historic resources, but a lot of the gems that are out there, unless they're facing demolition, we've kind of worked through a substantial list. We tried to focus on culturally underrepresented groups, the American Indians, the African American community, certain churches representing those groups throughout the city. And of course, you know about Tilsonville, that unique history it had. And we've looked at Homewood, which I think kind of illuminated the care by which you need to conduct these culturally sensitive studies and who's doing them and how we're inclusive and get the communication and the engagement that's best suits those studies. So we would welcome a conversation with council about the priorities. That work will continue. They are leveraged by CLG grants, but that still takes work away from other work that we're doing. We'll get into other slides about the volume of construction that we've been experiencing for the last 6 years. And so the same planners doing heritage preservation work are often doing other work in long-range planning around the comp plan and long-range and current planning through our boards and commissions and review. But I do appreciate that you've taken an interest that and championed a very interesting and undertold story in your own ward. and your engagement in that. And so we do welcome talking more about that. We think it is important work. It will become more important as the demographics in the city change, and these groups are a broader piece of our city fabric in terms of numbers. So we
Yeah.
welcome that. And of course, we're going to have other waves of different groups coming into the city, right? The Southeast Asians and East Africans. So this is going to be an ongoing effort.
So thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I do think kind of just taking a bigger overall look too at the work, I will tell you this small statistic, which is that I have nominated myself with the encouragement of and cooperation of property owners 3 properties or historic districts connected to African American history, and that has increased by 100%. The number of these properties connected to African American history locally designated in the city of Minneapolis, which just all that says really is that we had a very small number and that 3 nominations could increase that by 100%. And that just says to me more, it's just like kind of a bigger picture look. And again, I think your important information about just, again, those pressures on the time of your staff. You have very few staff, and sounds like they're getting pulled into work that is kind of the broader long-range planning work and other things where their skills are needed, but it isn't specific on preservation. That adds to the puzzle.
Chairman Quincy, Councilmember Glidden, some of my colleagues, not necessarily Mr. Frank, would say this is a great pitch to reform that group and get a manager doing that work, but that's not what we didn't put that in the budget through this cycle. I would just say one thing that I think to move that dial, I think there's a great opportunity to educate the people empowered to make those nominations, which are commissioners at the Preservation Commission, council members, and we don't have a planning director per se. So again, who's nominating them? There's a great opportunity for a dialogue there about kind of bringing these nominations and elevate them over other choices. So
I think that is definitely a good conversation, but the more we have kind of a plan guiding sort of that work to happen, I think the more you will see it happen. I think in my case, it's a little more happenstance and opportunity because those are constituents that I've been working with as opposed to, some guidance on we need to look for these opportunities because we haven't been making those connections historically.
Chairman Quincy, Councilmember Glidden, if I may, one more point. Yes, that's true. And I would just say when it comes to actual physical resources, those are usually responses to something being threatened of demolition or others. So again, how much capacity we can have a plan, but if something's under immediate threat, that tends to drive some work as well. So it is a balancing act. I hear you.
True, I've been part of those as well.
Go ahead, Mr.
Thank
Frank.
you, Mr. Chair. Let's see. We are up to Program 9, which is our Customer Service Center, second of 3 for Development Services. Jeannie and Ryan is the manager of our Customer Service Center. This is where this is our front door and service center for the city's consolidated development activities. We focus on consistent, streamlined customer service. We ensure high-quality development while requiring that building construction and rehabilitation projects meet our standards in terms of safety, livability, and health, plus environmental sensitivity. And the Customer Service Center is the development hub for residents, contractors, and businesses in one location for convenience and efficiency. This is where we review and issue building permits, partner department permits for housing rental licenses, and Public Works critical parking permits. And you can also get a pet license at the center, I think. We're implementing ELMS at the Customer Service Center, and we operate every day in a customer-facing environment, even with record demand for our services. The Customer Service Center's recommended 2018 budget is $3.1 million compared to $2.9 million in 2017, and we are recommending a continued staffing level of 20. Our results in 2016 for the Customer Service Center show that we served almost 15,000 customers at the counter, almost 8,000 customers with plan review, more than 8,000 land use customer interactions, more than 4,500 development coordinator customer contacts. These are the larger and more complicated projects. Program 10 is the last of our standard programs. It's the third of 3 budget programs for CPED's Development Services Division, and Pat Higgins, the city's building official, is the manager of Construction Code Services. CCS, as we call it, consists of the 3 business lines of construction plan review, construction inspections, and programs, and the goal is the fair and comprehensive application of our city ordinances. Public safety in the built environment is, of course, one of our primary goals. Plan review accepts all applications for building, elevator, mechanical, plumbing work that require plan review and a permit to perform the work. And CCS, it's worth noting, is the group which is called on when tragedies strike, such as the Minnehaha Academy explosion. We are also doing 220 Super Bowl temporary cell phone antenna reviews together with Public Works. CCS's recommended 2018 budget is $12.5 million compared to $11.1 million in 2017, and we are recommending a continued staffing level of 70. As you've heard, our 2016 results show that permits continue to be in the $1.5 to $2 billion a year range, and we have once again increased the number of permits for projects over $1 million. This is our 6th year of record construction. We think the construction boom is largely due to the surge in market rate apartments, to the question earlier, plus office and hotels. And remember, after the building permits are issued, our inspectors are busy for the next few years, and we are keeping our inspection rates up too, which is good for our insurance costs. So, Mr. Chair, I'm moving into our non-program other budget categories now. Great. So program 11 is debt service and transfers. This is the first of 3, which are outside our operating divisions. Debt service and transfers relates to the administration and management of CPED financial resources with our external partners and between CPED funds. And we move money back and forth to pay, for instance, to pay annual debt service on bonds or other contractual obligations to undertake CPED's activities. The recommended 2018 budget for debt service and transfers is $36.1 million compared to $35.5 million in 2017. Operating capital, or for CARS, which is Capital Asset Request System, is the second of 3 budget categories outside our operating divisions. The recommended 2018 budget for CARS is $1.7 million, following $1.7 million in 2017. The recommendation here is to replace what's called MINS, which is our Management Information Network System. This is an essential CPED business application, and it's for our property management, our real estate projects, and our loan programs. The current system is obsolete. It was custom built in the mid-90s, and it's dependent on other software that's no longer supported. We have CLIC capital recommendations. This is the third of our 3 budget categories outside operating divisions. The CLIC recommended 2018 budget for capital items, which have an impact on CPED's budget, are the $500,000 for the Development Infrastructure Program, which I think all of you know about, and the $700,000 for art in public places. And here's what I've been looking forward to. This is our fantastic team. We just had our annual picnic, and we asked everyone to sign the Tennyson waivers so we could take a picture of almost all of us in one place. These are the people who do the work that I've been talking about. These are the people who serve the businesses and the residents of Minneapolis. These are the people who answer questions when I call saying, I don't understand. And I really am grateful to them for the work that they do. I want to thank them and thank you, the committee, for your time today. If you have any further questions, we are available.
Thank you very much. Council Vice President. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I didn't have a question, but I will just take the opportunity to say thank you. I think you got a great team, and you know, there's a lot on the shoulders of CPED. That's really big work. So I just want to say thank you, and we'll continue to engage on the budget questions here.
Appreciate that very much. I would concur and amplify the pleasure that was to have you here go through a detailed budget in an organized by program basis. I think it reflects a lot about the not only the quality of the staff who put this together and the coordination with other departments that make that possible, including our finance department, but we wanted to make sure that you were recognized for that work you've already done this year, and looking forward to how this budget supports the goals and values and the strategic directions that we have for the city in the coming year. So thank you very much. Seeing no further comments or questions, this budget hearing is closed, and we can look forward to a transition to the next one, which will be regulatory services.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, sorry,
How did we,
I guessed an hour, but it was longer. Sorry.
Yeah, how'd that go? I know
Right,
you
it
were-
was really nice feedback.
speak-
There was
speak
no
loud.
big protest.
Okay. Thank you again for joining us. This is continuing of our budget hearings schedule, and I think we're ready to begin with the Regulatory Services Department's presentation. So, Mr. Schuckman, welcome. Whenever you're ready, please feel free.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, Noah Schuckman, Director of Regulatory Services, here to present our portion of the 2018 Mayor's Recommended Budget. Just take a moment, I won't name everyone that's here, but to acknowledge a group of our staff, including most of our leadership team that's here today. And I want to thank them for their work on putting this together. I will start with our org chart. It is unchanged from the last few years. We still have 4 field divisions, animal control, traffic control, housing inspections, and fire inspections, and 2 administrative divisions, operations, and administration and community engagement. The budget summary slide is here. Unless you are interested in specifics, I'll keep moving. And in light of the programmatic similarities from previous years, unless there's an objection, I'll stick with change items and a few measures. And
That's totally appropriate. Just want to pause in between before you change slides and make sure we have an opportunity to probe on any questions after that program is discussed. And I imagine most of these program changes will reflect back to that original slide of the template that we looked at quickly, but I hope we can go back to it as needed. Go ahead, Councilman Vice President.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you and your staff know that I was scheduled to be at a Clean Energy Partnership meeting that starts in a few minutes, so it's not that I am not paying attention and interested in your budget. I will review it after the fact so people don't wonder why I'm walking out at
Fair enough.
3 in the afternoon. So thank you.
Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Council Vice President, I'm happy to talk to you obviously offline as well if you have specific questions. Starting with our core programs, our first division that I'll talk through is administration and community engagement. There is one change item in that division, and that is a $50,000 add for one-time money to continue our work on equity and inclusion efforts. The department has invested in equity and inclusion work, including staff time and financial resources, and this addition will allow us to continue to work internally and with outside stakeholders on that effort. I have a chart coming up that'll just summarize a little bit of that work as well. Before I get to that chart, I just wanted to note on the left the updated chart on the All Together Now program, which is a continued success that we've seen in working with neighborhood groups and residents to do proactive education ahead of inspectors coming through, and we've seen substantial reductions in the number of violations in the neighborhoods that are being worked with in that program. Additionally, on the bottom left, I wanted to note the the homeowner navigation program, which helps us to manage difficult homeowner cases with inspections and help to connect those homeowners with services to help resolve the issues that they have. Mostly that we're dealing with veterans, seniors, and the disabled, but that is something that a program that we have found great success with. On page 9 is a summary of our equity and inclusion activities. Specifically want to call out the one at the top of the spoke, which is the Career Pathways program. It supplements the department's existing focus on internal promotional pathways, and we've been developing it using funding dedicated in the budget through the coordinator's office for this work. We have a staff team that's working with an outside consultant made up of staff from each one of our divisions to develop a program specifically for the department, but also to make it so that it's both scalable and available for other departments to use as a model in the future. And that is intended to help staff with developing the hard and soft skills that are necessary to help move them through either city systems or external promotional opportunities. Moving on to fire inspection services. We have a change item in that division, which is the addition of ongoing funding for one inspector that will work on rental license inspections in high occupancy dwellings, which we define as buildings with 4 or more units. That request is reflective of continued increases in licensed rental properties of 4 or more units, which I will show you on a chart here on the left. On the upper left, you'll see since 2010, there's been a 24% increase in buildings of 4 or more units that are rental properties, and 25% in the number of units in those buildings in that time. This change item would help us to keep up with that pace moving forward.
Mr. Schickman, that just adds up real quickly to me about $200,000 or so in continuing funding. Is that correct? What would that be besides the additional FTE?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm a little lost as to the question.
I was just going back to the budget summary, and the fire inspection services line item
Yes.
has about $200,000 of general fund new dollars. And it
I see your question.
has the one full-time.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The question, to your question, that $75,000 that's listed on that slide in the general fund column under the change items is money that is in the mayor's budget for Super Bowl related activities for both this division. Fire inspection services handles inspections and fire watch for large buildings and for events. And then also it includes money for traffic control during that time. And so they're bunched together in this one line item, but they're both for both items are for overtime expenses associated with Super Bowl activities. Right. Our normal costs of business are not included in that.
Right. I think it's important to note those as we're required to put it in the budget as an expenditure, but it's also worth noting that those are eligible for reimbursements from the local host committee. So it's revenue neutral on our ongoing kind of basis. So when it shows up as a change item in ongoing, I just want to draw attention to the fact that that's a reimbursable expense, but that's what the cost will be, and it's for overtime and additional services, especially with traffic. Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Schickman, this $131,000 for FTE with regards to high occupancy dwelling inspections, I'm just wondering, I mean, does this mean that the person will have more people to go out there to do like stakeouts to see if more people are living in units and stuff like that? Because, like, I mean, in the few times that I've had complaints about that, I mean, it just seems like our answer is really just kind of like, well, it's really hard to determine, I mean, who's living in those units and all that stuff. So, I mean, what does it mean exactly to get an extra FTE, and, what will the results produce?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, the intent of the FTE is to help us to lower the frequency or raise the frequency with which we get into buildings of 4 or more units. We have a 3-tier system for rental license inspections, and that helps us to manage the workload. And one of the ways, as we've seen this rise that I mentioned in the number of units and buildings, is we need additional staff to keep up that pace. And so this would be an inspector that would help with doing a full inspection of the building and the units inside the building to make sure that they're up to code.
Okay, so I love how I'm reading this wrong then, but appreciate it. Yeah, I guess, I just had a recent constituent complaint about, units where, people claim that they're supposed to just have, let's say, 4 people in the unit, and there's like 15. And so we're not talking about that piece. We're talking about just, I mean, multi-unit facilities and those sorts of things, right?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, that's certainly an element of what the staff would look for,
Okay.
would be making sure that the occupancy meets the building code that is appropriate for the space, but it's not specifically targeted at that type of thing. It's an element of it, though.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. So moving on to housing inspection services. There's not a change item associated with this division for the 2018 budget, but I wanted to, along the lines of the fire inspection services chart that I just showed, showing the rise in the number of rental properties, I wanted to specifically call out the chart on the top left, which shows alongside that, in buildings of 1 to 3 units, an increase of 52% in those since 2010. And just call that out as something that continues to be a trend both in small and large buildings, an increase in rental properties in the city. I wanted to just also take the opportunity to note that I believe CPED's request includes money for phone bank services for tenants and additional money for legal services for tenants as part of their budget. And the phone bank services is something that was part of the regulatory services budget over the past few years. In our work with Homeline, I've worked very closely with Housing Director Andrea Brennan and with Interim Director David Frank on housing issues over the past few years. And we don't feel great ownership over where that money goes, but I do want to say that I do believe it's needed, and that I included a request along the same lines supportive of their request in my request in the mayor's budget. And so I'm pleased that it's in there, and I wanted to just offer my support to that.
I appreciate that as well, Mr. Schickman, because it's a tremendous amount of investment we need to make in some of the tenant-related work that we're doing. And having it start in reg services, it's not, as you said, proprietary interest of which department. It's continuing the work. So I really appreciate the coordination between the housing division and reg services on making sure that we're focused in the right areas for the right folks. So thank you for that, and for supporting that work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moving on to Minneapolis Animal Care and Control. There is also not a change item associated with this division this year, but I wanted to call out some numbers that we have. On the left of this chart, you'll see calls for services, and specifically I wanted to mention both the increase in investigations over the past 3 years and the increase in information requests over the past 3 years. And both of those, we believe, are associated with our increased focus on community engagement and doing education of residents so that they understand both what Minneapolis Animal Care and Control does and the ways in which Minneapolis Animal Care and Control can be helpful. And that has led to better communication with residents, but also it has given us a greater opportunity to look into to issues that have risen. And made the city better for both people and for pets as we do that.
Before I'm sorry, I didn't know if that was the last one on Mac. This is, we're not looking for any change areas in this. Am I missing that?
No, Mr. Chair, that's correct. In the mayor's recommended budget for 2018, there's not a change item associated with animal control.
Okay. Does that impact the planning that's needed and ongoing, I'm thinking, on the facility itself?
Mr. Chair, council members, that is, I have some information in that a bit later when we talk about cars and ongoing requests, but we definitely are in the middle of working with property services to look at the use of the building and look at what needs we have both immediate and long-term in the building. One of the things we've discovered, there was money in 2017 that was allocated through cars for surgical space. I think it's $375,000. And as we looked into using that and putting that money into the building, it became clear that it was going to be a temporary solution to a longer-term problem. And so I would expect there's not a long-term or capital request for animal control for the 2018 budget, but our intent in working with property services for 2019 to have a capital request associated with Minneapolis Animal Care and Control. More than anything, we've outgrown the building,
Right.
both in terms of staff and the animal needs, and we can't expand physically the footprint of the building, and the building also is not built to go up. And so we're essentially out of space there, and so we'll be working with property services to bring a proposal for the future on that.
Right. Just wanted to highlight that because I know it's been an interest. I've heard from a number of constituents on that topic. And I know it's going to be talked about in cars, but when we look at no change, it could make some people concerned, but that's an operational no change in the budget.
That's correct, Mr. Chair, and it certainly doesn't reflect our concerns over the building as
Right.
much as our need to do longer-term planning and make sure that we're bringing a fully cooked proposal to the discussion.
Thank you.
So moving on to our Operations and Business Improvement Division. There is a change item associated with this division, and that is associated with the enterprise land management system. It's a $140,000 in one-time money that is for configuration and analysis resources as we continue to bring the system into working with our staff and to develop it for the future. The land management system continues to develop. It's requiring additional configuration and internal project management within the department to meet our needs. As you'll see on the next slide, the change item builds on our internal investments in 2016 and in 2017 as we work to implement the system. We've made substantial investments as a department in ELM's implementation. You'll see they're laid out here in four specific areas. In addition to just substantial staff time, we have dedicated a training team, created a detail position for one staff person to kind of lead the department's work and work with IT, created an internal support website for staff, and invested in our own resource with the vendor for doing specific configurations for the department. That'll allow us to meet both our needs business-wise and then statutory needs as well. On the next slide, I wanted to just note as well the department's work on our equal employment opportunity efforts. We've seen, I believe your chart says 115, that's a typo. We've seen a 15% increase in employees of color and a 13% increase in female employees. And just to note that the department has not also grown at that rate. We've grown at a 9% rate, so we've seen an increase, and we've spent a great deal of time focusing our energies around those efforts to try to impact them. Additionally, on the right, I just want to note the substantial increase in the number of trainings that our staff did in 2016, and those are associated with our implementation of the land management system. As I mentioned earlier, it's something that we spent a great deal of the back end of 2016 training staff and getting them ready for, and I think that will still be reflected as we look at 2017 numbers in this area as well.
Great. Thank you.
And final division I wanted to talk through was our Code Compliance and Traffic Control Division. There are 2 change requests associated with this division. The first of them is for the 3rd year, a continuation of part-time staffing, 10 employees for $375,000 in one-time money. This is to meet ongoing demand, which I'll break down here momentarily. At this point of 2017, as we've looked at it, the demand has not abated at all, and so our intent for 2019 and beyond is to ask for this as ongoing money. We've essentially at this point, after 3 straight years of need, it seems fairly clear that this is going to be an ongoing need for the city. The second change item is associated with the nighttime mobility project that we have been a part of along with the police department and the downtown improvement district as we work to continue progress made in that realm, moving people in and around and out of downtown in the evenings and at the end of business hours for the bar and restaurant community. This proposal, the money that's associated in the mayor's recommended budget, is $478,000 ongoing and $145,000 in one time, which is associated with 15 part-time employees. That would be 1 supervisor and 4 traffic control agents, and then 4 vehicles. And that would allow us to staff that area 3 nights a week, year-round. And we expect to see some revenue back as a result, but the bulk of this is associated with needing to just help make sure that those things are moving. And that is the extent of that proposal.
Is the nighttime mobility change, is that just focused on the downtown entertainment district, or does it reach other areas of our city besides downtown?
Mr. Chair, committee members, that's correct. It's the downtown kind of core entertainment area that has been focused on.
Okay. Thank you.
I mentioned an increase in the staffing needs that we have associated with events, but as you'll see on the left, since 2011, we've had a 119% increase in 311 complaints that traffic control is responding to. And on the right, you'll see a 63% increase in the number of hours of work doing traffic control itself, moving vehicles in that sense, in those 4 areas since 2011. And so it's associated with construction, special events, emergencies, and then rush hour. And so that's everything from open streets to sports and to when you leave work today and there's a traffic control agent in an intersection, it's them doing that. And so that's what the request for the additional, the one-time money for the 10 additional agents is associated with as well. Moving on to our capital recommendations, there's one included in the budget, which is a $30,000 line item for replacement of iPads for traffic control. We have a new ticket writer system that's in the middle of implementation right now, but the iPads allow us to connect with Minneapolis 311 and respond to complaints. In addition, when we have a snow emergency, they are crucial for communicating with the impound lot and tow companies during that time. And so this would allow us to continue a replacement cycle for those iPads and keep them fresh and current and working with the systems we have. As I mentioned, we have one future year request. I mentioned it earlier during the animal control portion, but it would be a capital request that we expect to come in next year's budget process for long-term planning for the animal control facility. With that, I'm happy to stand for questions. And I want to just take a brief moment to thank, in addition to our staff here, the other 190 odd staff of regulatory services who spend their workday making the city safer and work better for all. And so I just want to take a moment to thank them.
Thank you. Seeing no further, I'm sorry. Councilmember Gordon, why are you sitting way down there? We miss you up here.
Didn't want to disturb anybody when I came in so late. Sorry about that. I did have one question on the slide on page 29. a couple back, it just talks about the revenue, and we see a decline in revenue, I believe, from 2012 to 2016. And I'm wondering what you attribute that to.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, without digging into it more specifically, I would tell you that we have seen a revenue decline that is associated with, I think you'd see it associated with an increase in the parking fund as the new meter system came in, because the new meters are easier to, you can plug the meter essentially from your table at the restaurant. Our fine revenue drops because people are not having as many tickets. And so I would need to talk with the budget office and dig into that to give you a more specific answer, but my best guess and what we have talked about internally is that they would be associated with that. We're a victim of our own success in the sense that the new meter system works better, which means there's fewer violations.
Well, yeah, I think that is a good thing, I guess, if it's more compliance, and that's why that the revenue's gone down. I appreciate that. If you learn more, feel free to let me know.
Thank you,
Yeah.
will do.
That's right. The revenues associated with the citations have gone down, but it's balanced out almost 2 to 1 from what I understand in terms of the parking fund in the revenues gained through the parking funds. So it's a pretty significant revenue growth for the city, although a department is going to look like it took a hit. I think the largest hit has actually been to the county because we get about 25% of a citation for a parking violation. The rest is for court costs in district court. And so unfortunately for them, they don't have the parking revenue to balance out the revenue gain. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask a question about the housing inspection services. And one thing we've been hearing, so the tiered rental licensing system is relatively new, and as we review it, I'm struck by how many properties are within the Tier 1 category, and I know that those are inspected less frequently, sort of as a routine inspection. Can you talk about that, and just, are we getting into those Tier 1 properties enough? How is that reflected in the budget request, or what we might need to do in the future?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, I think we are getting into those properties. We are in the middle of our general estimate is that we get into a Tier 1 property about every 7 or 8 years, a Tier 2 property around every 5, and a Tier 3 property annually. We're in year 3 of implementing that as a way of handling workflow. And so we're midway through the cycle of getting through all of those Tier 1 properties. I think one of the things we find is that some of those properties are still in Tier 1, and then some of them have, for various reasons, deteriorated to the point that they, when we do get in them, have issues that we need to address, and they end up moving around in the tiers. Even if we are not scheduled to get into one of those properties during the year because of the tier, we respond to complaints and are addressing those issues that arise when they do. And so just because it's in a Tier 1 and we haven't gotten to it as part of our regular schedule doesn't mean that we would not get into it if there was a need or address complaints or physical issues in the building. Because of the rise, to answer the second part of your question, because of the continued rise in the number of rental licenses, the budget includes, at my request, it includes additional staff to help make sure that we're managing that workload.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schickman. I think that does a terrific job of outlining the budget, recommended budget, and the benefits to the city and its residents associated with that. So thank you very much for the work that you and the department all does to do a terrific job managing this complex and ever-growing and fluid department. So thank you very much for everybody's work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that concludes this budget presentation, and we'll look forward to the next series next week, and we're adjourned.